Welcome to Win Wednesdays, an initiative of Point Park's Roland School of Business Women in Industry program. As we get started today, a few reminders. One is that our session today is recorded and it will be posted at our website, www.acceleratingwin.org, typically within about a week of the session. And if you do have questions, and we hope you do throughout the session today, please submit those questions through the Q&A function in Zoom. The Women in Industry initiative at the Roland School of Business is all about educating and empowering. It's about accelerating the success of women-identified students and professionals, engaging leaders, affecting conversations, and encouraging allyship through elevating experiences. We have several different initiatives, one of which is the Win Wednesdays virtual speaker series, which you're attending today. Another is our Accelerating Women in Industry program that aligns with International Women's Day in March. So that will be coming up on March 5th. When the environment allows for it, we have a campus speaker series. And of course, you can always support our initiatives through our website, and that is available on your screen. I'm Doreen Saletti, here with my colleague, Sandy Mervosh. We are the co-architects of the Women in Industry program, and we're excited to be with you today. So I'm going to turn it over to Sandy, and she will get us started with today's exciting session.
Thank you, Doreen. We are really excited about today's session. Today we have with us Jennifer Ferris-Glick. She is the owner of Above to Below, a boutique consulting company. She transformed from cognitive neuroscience researcher to mindfulness and business consultant over the last 2 decades. Jennifer helps the most powerful leaders become more aware of themselves through scientifically based and experiential methods. When not working with corporations and clients, she is running around wrangling her 3 sons, reading, meditating, and doing yoga, often at the same time. For more information, you can go to Above to Below website and find out more about Jennifer. Jennifer, we're really thrilled that you're here with us today and that you have this wonderful topic to introduce to us.
Well, thank you so much for having me, both of you, and Point Park, of course. So I just want to kind of, before I get started, tell you that if you don't have a pen and paper handy or something to take a note on, get one, because you might want to take some notes. It's my hope that you want to take some notes. I thought I'd just very, very quickly just give a brief overview of where I've come from and why I'm here. I came from a long line of entrepreneurs, and I very, very, very actively said I was never going to own a business. I was going to treat academia as my business. And I did that successfully for quite a few years. For about 15 years, I was at Bucknell, I was at Carnegie Mellon, I was doing cognitive neuroscience research, and I studied where humans learn and have moments of insight, right? And I got pregnant and I decided I was done with academia. So I left and opened a business doing exactly what I said I wasn't going to do. So I currently own a handful of businesses. I've bought, I've sold, I've dissolved, I've maintained a bunch of different businesses, including yoga, meditation, corporate wellness. I own a franchise of Dog Stop and a variety of other things, and obviously Above to Below, which is the consulting company. And I just wanted to kind of plug in here very quickly the fact that we've done some really wonderful things Above to Below and Point Park, one of which is doing the Vigor, Vibe, and Venture Business Challenge. And we take all of the stuff that we talk about in this presentation and we put it into action with the applicants. So we choose a winner who can win $10,000, and we are going to do this twice a year starting next year. So it's pretty cool. If you're interested in that, shoot me an email. I'll have my email address at the end and I can send you some more information. So now's a good time to switch the slide. So the last Win Wednesday that we had was with Christy Stuber, and she talked about the 5 keys to a healthy brain. And I just wanted to very briefly touch on these because our presentations go very much hand in hand and very much intentionally. She talked about these 5 keys, exercise, sleep, nutrition, novelty, and mindfulness, as being the ways in which we can begin to manage our stress. And so obviously, I'm going to be talking a bit more about the mindfulness aspect. So you can switch the slide. What is mindfulness? It's a term that's thrown around a lot these days, and it's sort of it's like trendy, kind of like pivot, right? And it's used interchangeably frequently with meditation, but they are very distinct, separate things. So meditation is the use of techniques to direct our attention. It's just one kind of training that we use in mindfulness to give clarity, focus, and awareness. And mindfulness is kind of like the umbrella. It's knowing what's happening while it's happening. It's much bigger than just the meditation, right? It's being fully present and aware of where we are, what we're doing, how we're reacting to things, and allowing ourselves to hopefully not be too overwhelmed by our environment. So when we talk about mindfulness in relation to work, we recognize it as a tool. So it's a tool to meet our life and our work demands more skillfully so that we can engage in a better way. And the ability to be more effective, alert, and calm and composed, amidst a storm or while navigating waters, kind of like in this slide, where there's more to a situation than meets the eye. So oftentimes we are in experiences where there is a depth there's a complexity, and we kind of need to dig down to the basic factors. And that awareness is really what mindfulness is. You may notice that I use a lot of iceberg imagery, and that is very intentional. First, they're really pretty to look at. But second, I love the idea of thinking about we only see what's above the water, right? We only see what's above the water. And for me, for above to below, for the way that we operate, that mindfulness is digging below the water. So we know what we're navigating. We become more aware and we can navigate more effectively. So I thought we'd start out with just a very, very simple little task. So take a moment and close your eyes. And I want for you to just notice all of your thoughts. Now, you might notice that you are being assaulted with thoughts, right? You might swing from thought to thought. And, we often call that monkey mind. Like that's a really common term in Buddhism. But, I want you to just be aware. Just notice how it's happening. Notice the kind of swinging from thought to thought. And then we're going to take a breath or two, and we're going to do it together. So we're going to breathe in to a count of 4 and exhale to a count of 4. So release all of the air from your lungs. Take a nice deep inhale, 2, 3, 4, and then exhale, 2, 3, 4. And again, inhale, 2, 3, 4, and exhale, 2, 3, 4. One last time, inhale, 2, 3, 4, exhale, 2, 3, 4. Now sit in this little valley of silence for just a moment and see what happens with your thoughts. And if you have an experience that you want to share, you can just kind of share that in the Q&A. But oftentimes what happens is we notice our minds slow. You can begin to open your eyes, kind of come back to the moment, my amazing face, my smile. So happy to see you, sort of. All right. If you had an experience, please feel free to share it. Otherwise, you can switch to the next slide. Okay. So there are lots of adaptations that are theoretically supported by science. And I say that because there's a lot of different ways to do clinical trials and things of that nature. And when it comes to mindfulness, it's pretty tough to capture it. So we say that, you know, the research supports this. When we intentionally focus our attention in a mindful way in using mindfulness practices, something very, very different happens in the brain activation from anyone who doesn't have a mindfulness practice. So with repetition, that we create these intentional states. And what happens is they become enduring traits. We actually can change our genetic expression, which is wild. I mean, you're clearly not going to change the color of your eyes through meditation, which, I mean, maybe some of us want that, but we won't do that. But what we can do is alter the way that our brain functions. So I'm not going to read this exhaustive list, but one of the things I do want to point out is that not only are we just changing our traits and not just our emotional states, but we can do things like begin to control our heart rate, which is huge, right? We can begin to increase the effectiveness of our immune system. We can alter our moods, our self-confidence, the way that we approach our leadership abilities. We decrease cellular aging and gray matter atrophy, which is it's something that happens in the course of aging. We get rid of negative thought patterns, which who doesn't have those? And we get to reduce the experience of pain. I mean, all of these things are pretty amazing. Not only do we do that, but we get to move into a space where we are being mindful, not ruminating on past, and not obsessing about future. And I don't know about you guys, but that was one of the things when I was in academia that really, really affected me. I was constantly stuck in future planning, and I didn't want to do that anymore. Now I'm stuck in future planning in a different way. So all of this helps us cultivate emotional awareness, and it allows us to handle stress instead of allowing the stress to handle us, right? How many times have you been overtaken by a moment and you have not been able to pull yourself out of it? So all of this, I recognize I'm talking about this in an individual level, and business is one microcosm of our entire world, right? Community, business, and we want to take these practices from this very sort of centered place of us and expand it outwards. You could go ahead and change the slide, please. So, have you ever made a decision? And I'll ask this and you can answer it in the Q&A if you are so inclined. Have you ever made a decision where you felt in your gut that it wasn't the right one, but you did it anyhow? I mean, I've done this a million times. Or how about a time when you listen to everybody around you, but not yourself? So how did those experiences turn out for you? I'll give you a few moments to answer that if you'd like. So for a lot of people, those situations don't turn out in a positive light. They're clearly an opportunity for learning. And if you operate from a place of stress and being too stimulated by outside experiences, influences, environments, fears, you make poor decisions. And that's just the bottom line across the board, always, never fails. So we look at it this way. If we are a business and we run a business like we captain a ship, right? It has to be captained. There has to be a leader. Navigating those iceberg-infested waters, we need to figure out how to do that in an effective way. And if we're constantly living in a state of fear, stimulated by external influences and swayed by others, we could make poor decisions and be like the Titanic. And we don't want to do that. A big, beautiful boat that sinks. No, we don't want that. So Mark Lesser created this wonderful little book. He's a guy who's a mindfulness expert. He actually worked at the San Francisco Zen Center, and he wrote this book, 7 Practices for Mindful Leadership. And when I read it, I was like, oh my gosh, he took like my entire dissertation. So I'm going to use his outline because it's such a lovely outline. So the 7 things are: love the work, do the work, don't be an expert, connect to your pain, connect to the pain of others, depend on other people, and keep making it simpler. Ugh, yeah, those are all so difficult sometimes. So in this way, we always start with the leadership. And we've heard this from a myriad of other women who have presented here. We always start with the leadership, right? We recognize that there's a trickle-down effect. And when the leader of a company isn't aware and isn't present, the team won't be aware, won't be present, and subsequently the business will not run efficiently. So next slide, please. So loving the work, what the heck does that mean? It means that we are cultivating mindfulness. The work is the mindfulness, and curiosity is the key. When we engage in mindfulness and be curious, we can see with greater clarity. We move into self-awareness and decrease self-centeredness, which sometimes feels like a little bit of an oxymoron, but it isn't. We approach everything with curiosity, and in that examination, we explore the ways in which we create limited mindsets and narrow models. I mean, how many times have you entered into a circumstance where you've been like, I'm not going to learn anything here? And you walk away either being shut off and not learning anything, or you opened yourself up to listen and you surprised yourself, right? So with that, when we engage in mindfulness, we become intimate with all of the patterns of our mind and how we behave. And this is a big deal because we get to understand how we can change better, how we can transform. The other piece of this is kind of digging into the idea of detaching from identification. So identifying with our story and our narrative, and then we again narrow ourselves, we pigeonhole ourselves into something where we don't have the opportunity to grow. So the work is to become observing as if you are a witness. It's almost as if you are a third person viewer of your experience. And that goes for personal experience and business experience. So in this way, we take mindfulness tools and we train our mind to be more satisfied with the present. And, you know, that's not to say that we're getting complacent. And I will refer to that a lot, like contentment does not equal complacency. So for me, I love being curious. It's one of my favorite things. And in a lot of ways, it's become a superpower. I was talking with Doreen and Sandy and Patrick about this before we started. I ask really tough, direct questions, and it's not to be terse or harsh. It's usually because I hear something and I see a disconnect. And when we engage in curiosity, we can listen better, right? We hear better. We hear the people around us. We hear ourselves better. So I like to move deeply into things. And excuse me, whenever we're in a session, you know, with Above to Below and a client, we usually try to do this by beginning with the senses and how something feels. So we're going to do a very brief exercise really quickly. And again, you can close your eyes. I'm trying to make this as interactive as possible so that you get a little taste of some of the things that we can offer whenever we're working with people. So close your eyes, and we're going to do a little bit of sixth sense noting. And I know you're probably like, there are only 5 senses and the sixth sense is some woo-woo stuff, but it's not, I promise. So close your eyes. And I'm just using inspiration from an acquaintance, Rohan Gantilaki. He wrote this book called Modern Mindfulness, and it's really wonderful. And I've kind of watered down his exercise a little bit. So just come to your breath for a moment and sense how your body posture is right now. And just be aware of how your body feels, right? So knowing the simple sensations and recognizing that the sensations are just chemical and electrical impulses. Now, place your attention on how you're sitting, how your clothes are feeling on your body. And this is the sensation of touch. just one of the 6 ways that we receive information. And you can imagine it much like a radio, where we kind of dial in the frequency to the channel, right? So we've turned the channel to touch. Then I want you to shift your awareness, shift the channel, turn the dial to hearing. The ability to pay attention to sound is a mindful person's best friend. And that's because hearing requires our minds to be naturally open. So just take a few moments and be open to what you're hearing. And what sounds can you notice? Notice if you're able to let the sounds come and go. Do any particular sounds jump out at you? Maybe you're creating little stories or definitions of how the sounds are meeting you. But the key is not what happens, but that you're able to notice what happens. And there's a real subtle difference there, but it's a difference nonetheless. So this is hearing. Then move into your 3rd channel of experience, and that's seeing. Now, for a moment, just open your eyes and maybe stare at the words on your screen, and just like kind of let those marks be marks without putting a story to them. Recognize that they are things that we're very familiar with and they have meaning, but they're just marks. Some things you might see and it might suck in your attention. So like white versus blue. And if it does, just bring your attention back to being globally aware, right? So just look and see what you see all around. And try not to make anything more important than another thing. You can kind of just rest in that visual experience and don't let anything be more important. This is seeing. You can close your eyes again, and then we're going to tap into the 4th and 5th channels, and they are smelling and tasting. And these channels tend to get activated at specific moments, like when we're eating or drinking a cup of coffee. Most of the time, though, it can seem as though these channels are not active at all, but of course, not active, neutral is also an experience. It's just not a very noisy one. So moving to smell, seeing what you can notice through your nose, even if it's not much at all. This is smelling. And at the same time, move into tasting. So, come to that place of taste. Notice if you've got anything there. Again, recognizing that a neutral experience is still an experience. And typically I would have you move through these things and kind of test your mental agility, but we'll just move straight to the 6th sense for the sake of time. So the 6th sense is nothing mystical or spiritual or anything like that. It's just literally the moods and thoughts that we place onto our senses. And it is no or more less real than the other 5 senses. Just being aware of the contents of your mind can be a little trickier than being aware of your physical sense. Sometimes we get so stuck in it, we don't even realize what our mood or thought is coloring. So this is thinking. And this is how the mind is, right? We just move from thing to thing. So when you're ready, you can open your eyes. And then we'll move to the next slide when you're ready. So our next slide is do the work, which means practice, practice, practice. And what I mean is, we want to put these techniques, these tools that we use for ourselves into practice. Again, the ultimate goal is skillful engagement. And that's with ourselves, with others, in a business sense, in a familial sense. And to do that, we have to do the work and we practice. So we can integrate mindfulness into everything that we do. And there are two ways that we can practice. One is a dedicated practice, which means we literally set a time to dedicate ourselves to the practice. So that means, maybe we spend some time journaling, thinking about what we're thinking about. Or maybe we set aside time to meditate. Maybe we do something, I don't know, like take a class on being more mindful. The other way that we practice is an integrated practice, and that's actually putting the mindfulness into action. So we know that when we practice, we become faster at responding. So those emotional states that I referred to that my colleague, Richie Davidson, discovered, when we change those genetic traits, that means that these integrated practices, that's when we actually get to put those traits into action, right? We find a simple way to use them. And, like sometimes it's as simple as entering a meeting and taking a mindful breath, making yourself more open. For me, the simpler the better, because I have a way of really complicating things and making things too complex. And with above to below, this is how we approach business, as simply as possible. You get mindful about what you're doing. We train you a little bit in that. We see how you're feeling, and then we break the rest of the tasks down into digestible pieces. Sounds great, doesn't it? When we practice, we want to release results like we expect when we go to the gym, right? We go to the gym to get toned, maybe to lose weight, to feel good, like we've worked out some frustration. And when we put that type of mindset into mindfulness, it actually just leads to disappointment. So we try and let go expectations and be aware of any obstacles to awareness. And things like, I mentioned kind of taking a deep breath before you enter a meeting. We want to try to listen more openly. We want to find some self-compassion, because we find that when we're punitive towards ourselves, it actually does not breed more success. Oddly enough, I was talking with a friend yesterday about that. We also increase our emotional awareness so that we can move into a situation and not presume that we know everything. And then this is the big one. When we engage in mindful practices, we sometimes get called out on misalignments. And I joke on my LinkedIn. I mean, it's a joke and it's not a joke in so many ways, but like on my LinkedIn profile, it says something like Master of Alignment. And I often find that once we're asking questions, once you're getting mindful, you find those misalignments very, very quickly. And you discover that you cannot move forward in a way where you are living out of misalignment. And that might be something really simple as the way that you operate in a business setting versus the way that you actually feel inside. And those disconnects, that dissonance, is actually what increases anxiety and a lot of other stress that you don't need. So oftentimes we can find those misalignments. So one of the things I would say with regards to doing the work is, that you can kind of write this down if you want to, but maybe dedicating an opportunity or a time to become more mindful. And there are a ton of apps that you can use, like Headspace and Calm and the Insight Timer. Make yourself accountable to somebody. There's also books on mindfulness, like hundreds of thousands of books, like this one by Thich Nhat Hanh. It's called The Miracle of Mindfulness. There's very simple exercises in here, like half smile during your free moments. I mean, smiling, and it releases all of these endorphins. And if you stay in that moment for just a few seconds, you can really feel how it impacts the way that you experience everything. So when you're ready, I can go to the next slide, please. This next aspect, which I kind of hinted at in my last slide, don't be an expert. Obviously, in business, it's important to be an expert, but there is a way to do it with a delicate balance. That means that, you walk through with a sense of humility, but still being knowledgeable, right? When you're an expert, how many times, and maybe we can use this in the Q&A, maybe you can ask yourself, how many times have you gone to an event or a meeting and you've gone in as an expert? And you might not even be the keynote speaker, but you go in as an expert and you have a set of expectations and you know that you're not going to learn anything. How many times have you done that? And what did you walk away with? Could you sense how closed off you were? Or did you connect with anyone else except for maybe the other skeptic and know-it-all in the room? I do this. I catch myself doing this a lot. All right. So we need to find this balance of being an expert and being humble. And so the way in which we do that is to approach, Dave, I understand that. Yes, you keep quiet and try to be open. Yeah. So approach everything with an open mind, inquiry and openness, and try to be curious. Again, it is extremely important to embrace that beginner's mind, right? Always act like you're a beginner. It's also really important to embrace failure, right? How many of us are so scared to make a mistake, especially as type A overachievers, right? That's me. I'm in that group. We try to show up to the best of our ability so that we're not called out as not being an expert, right? When we become vulnerable and not an expert, we can really begin to see how we handle failure. And I mean that like in so many different ways, it's applicable. You can begin to unpack those habits and cycles that we see whenever we do fail at something. There are opportunities for learning. So again, seeing with fresh eyes. And when we see with fresh eyes, we're not so concerned with the story, but we're more concerned with the experience first. That is huge, right? That comes back to that mindset and pigeonholing yourself. So for instance, if you own a business or if you run a team and you have a story about every single person on that team and what they do and how they do it, and you are not open to their learning and their ability to show up differently, you don't experience them as it is, and you might miss some skill or some talent that they have. And as a leader, that's a no bueno. So we want to listen with open ears. As a leader, we want to listen with open ears, and we do that by not being an expert. I just kind of want to point out that there was this great research that was done at the University of Massachusetts that talks about the way that we mind wander. And when we come into a circumstance and we know everything, we don't mind wander. We're already beginning to create a retort, right? We're already beginning to respond, and we are not listening. So 90% of our actions are driven without thought. It's rote. Like, how many times have you driven down the road and you've been like, oh, I didn't realize how far I was in my trip? It's like rote, right? Your mind wandering somewhere else and not paying attention. So mindfulness allows you to kind of move into that space a little deeper. And you get to ask yourself, like, okay, am I worrying about the future? Am I ruminating on the past? Or am I just allowing thoughts to rise as they come? Kind of like when we did in the beginning. Okay, we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, with all of that being said, we're kind of coming down the home stretch. Connecting to your pain is important. And I'll talk about that in a moment as a leader. But aside from physical pain, we can feel different types of pain, right? Emotional pain, emptiness, disconnection, fear, vulnerability, insecurity, old traumas that get triggered through commentary or even energy from other people. And by feeling it, you can actually free up space to move forward. How many times have you been ruminating on a thought? And the moment you actually said it out loud, it's almost like you freed up that space to move on, right? And it's not always that quick, right? Sometimes you got to really rehash and rehash and rehash and say it and say it and say it and vent. But in a way, being able to connect to your pain and acknowledge it is like magic, right? It's a transmutation of energy. So it moves from being a not so good thing and a stressor to being a learning opportunity and then letting it go. Again, harder than it sounds. Here's another little thing that you can answer in the Q&A if you want. How many times have you experienced a painful or emotionally taxing situation at work and not addressed it? What happened? So for me, yeah, you felt bottled up. Yeah, absolutely. And for me, that bottling up actually begins to build resentments. And then I start to be a toxic person in the machine, right? I start to feel like I'm not trusting the leadership. Like I'm part of a place that I don't want to be a part of because they are not in alignment with me, right? And you see how this all kind of connects together? This is a huge cycle that we just continue to move through repeatedly. So some thoughts about connecting to your pain. To move forward, you have to acknowledge it. You can't just bottle it. We all know that bottling it causes us to explode and or get sick. And I also want to point out that pain oftentimes alerts us to trouble. And I mean that in a cultural sense, a lot of the times we just look for an opportunity to get rid of the symptoms and not actually address the root cause of the pain we're experiencing. And that's a huge thing. We want to be able to explore and welcome the pain instead of despair, right? We don't want to overlook what has harmed us. In a similar way, we don't walk around with broken bones, right? When we walk around with a broken bone, it does nothing good for us in the long run, right? It might take a little while. It might never heal. You might have to get surgery. The same thing applies to emotions. With emotions, we want to be able to address it so that we can move on. At work, when a procedural issue arises, we want to revise that so that we can become more efficient in the way that we move forward, right? Otherwise, it festers and gets worse. There's a great exercise that we do for this particular thing where we talk about creating a visual timeline, and I love doing it on big sheets of paper. I like being able to see things where you kind of put your year of birth on one end, and then you put current year on the other end. And then through the timeline, maybe on the top, you kind of put all of the successes that you had. And on the bottom, you put all of the things that you would consider failures or learning opportunities on the bottom. And the beautiful thing about this is it's an assessment, it's an inventory, so that you can go through and see points of transformation. You can see cycles that you're still stuck in, and you can connect to this space of pain and figure out how to transmute the pain, right? All right, let's go to the next slide, please. All right. So this is an interesting thought, right? So we want to connect with the pain of others. And a key component of this is recognizing that every single person on the planet, unless maybe you're the Dalai Lama, and even then, I don't think that this is applicable there either. Every single person, if you are a human, you experience suffering on some level, right? And we carry that suffering with us. I mean, we try really hard not to, but we do it. Compassion for other human beings and recognizing that everybody is suffering is a huge key to happiness and contentment. And again, kind of circling back, contentment does not equal mediocrity. It doesn't mean subpar. It doesn't mean just satisfied. We're always striving for excellence. We're always striving for the best that we can be. But what I'm suggesting is that by moving into compassion and feeling that sense of contentment, we can move into a space of feeling more joyful. And that builds over time, right? So everything else, when we find that contentment and that satisfaction, is icing on the cake. You know, it's bonus material. I can think of 2 different times that I've held retreats with big companies. One was like a publicly traded company, and one was a smaller family-owned business. And we did retreats where they were trying, in both cases, to increase morale and to find a common vision and shared goals individually and as a group. And I've done this with multiple departments, like legal departments and stuff like that. But these 2 companies in particular kind of ring out to me or kind of stand out to me. Even the leaders of the company and the managers experienced doubt, experienced insecurities, experienced pain in their position. And these feelings are not necessarily a bad thing, but it's always surprising. It's always surprising to people when they express their insecurity and their doubt, especially when you're in a room full of pretty powerful leaders, and they say, oh yeah, I don't feel like I belong. That is almost, it's like a secret weapon, right? To build trust in your teams and in your business and family units and friends. So I laugh. I kind of put in my notes to mention this thing, like even Leonardo da Vinci, somebody who is iconic, right? We think of him with the Vesuvian Man, the Mona Lisa, the Last Supper. He was an amazing artist, a leader in his time, right? Even he felt doubts, and he wrote in his journal something to the effect of like, tell me if I ever did a thing, right? And it's so interesting because leaders of major companies will feel doubt, and that's okay. Connecting to our pain and our vulnerability is a solution to instilling trust from others. Being a leader and connecting to the pain of others means that we're fostering a sense of connection and community. And we do this by remembering a few things. One is that everyone has experienced suffering, as I said. We get to experience suffering and recognize that everybody has it. And, if you are disconnecting from it, you can recognize that like, oh, your pain is your pain, my pain is my pain, and never the two shall meet, when that is not actually the way that the world works. Oftentimes we find ourselves growing together and focusing on a community and sometimes commiserating, sometimes in a maladaptive way, but that's beyond this talk. And the other thing that we need to remember is that we're deeply connected. And I love thinking about this, because how many times have you walked into a meeting and you're like, oh, the energy in here is really bad, right? Or you've interacted with somebody and you felt really enlivened and inspired by it, right? Also, right, as women, for most, biological women, we recognize that our menstruation cycles can sync up, right? I've had that happen repeatedly. And these little things, they are indicators that we are so interconnected. We're deeply connected, energetically, physically, emotionally, all of that. And if we remember those pieces, like it's more than just a physical interaction, it's much deeper. That allows us to continue to foster that sense of connection. there are a couple of things that prevent us from connecting with others' pain and other people. And that is like John Gottlieb wrote a couple of books. He's a relationship psychologist. He talks about these 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and they are criticism, contempt, offensiveness, and stonewalling. And I feel like I keep this in the back of my mind, but I really feel like I should keep a note in my phone or keep it on my lock screen so that like I can look down and be like, am I engaging in contempt? Am I stonewalling? Just to make sure that I'm open, right? So something that you might want to think about, maybe at a later time, maybe now, is how do you avoid somebody else's pain? And what happens if you experiment with doing the opposite? I was going to lead us through another brief little meditation, but what I'll do is, for those of you who've watched this, my information will be at the end. I have recorded this just in case I ran out of time, and I'll send it to you by email, and then you can use it at any point in time. And you know, it's a type of Tibetan meditation that's used to learn how to connect with the pain of others while not holding it. So, you know, you kind of do it in an empathetic way, but not in a possessive way. So anyway, you can go to the next slide, please. All right. So here we are, depending on other people. Clearly, when we run a business, unless it's a one-man show, unless it's very small, unless we're not scaling, we have to depend on other people. And even then, we still need to depend on other people, because usually people are clients, people are vendors, right? There's never a time where we don't depend on other people. And that is bottom line. Having a team is an integrated mindfulness practice, right? Mindful leadership is the art of depending on others and doing it in a skillful way. And I love this example that Mark uses in his book. It's like fingers on a hand, right? You have these fingers and they're independent and they can work independently from each other. But when we have a hand and it works all together, it does amazing things. We can create buildings, right? It's truly, truly astonishing, right? So in the same way, we are part of an integrated team, whether it's at work or home, right? There's a big need in business to build a team with all the skills, with a shared vision so that you can be successful. So a leader has to identify the creative gaps, right? The who, what, where, you know, the skills that are lacking. What can I as a leader provide or not provide, and recognizing those things, right? When we take an outside perspective, and that's kind of like another thing that we do at Above to Below, we kind of come in as the observer, as the witness, so that we can move forward. The group depends on the leader, and the leader needs to place people into their correct positions. For instance, you would not have a ship engineer, somebody who manages the engines, take care of the navigation, right? That's just not what you do. So you find people to fill in those gaps. Being sensitive to the pain of others, connecting to that energetic, emotional, and physical connection and their pain, that means that we can do that effectively, you know, if you're a mindful leader. So leaders all share very common behaviors, or effective leaders all share the common behaviors. One is kind of coaching, right? Taking time with each team member, each person of the business. You empower them, right? You avoid micromanagement and you trust the team to get done the job that they need to do. You listen openly. You're not an expert. You humbly defer the expertise to your team. And you come in and hear what they're saying and provide suggestions. So there's a lot of this feeling, listening, holding space. And then you begin to identify places where there's resistance and individual focus. So the idea is that we want to, as a leader, we want to create community and foster relationships and kind of let go the need to be independently achieving, right? We want to create a positive group dynamic by providing safety, structure, clarity, dependability, all of those things. And meetings are the perfect way to do this, right? You can totally shift an entire the health of a company by having a meeting and asking the right questions and experiencing the right things. Okay, we can go to the next slide, please. The last of the 7 keys of mindful leadership is keep making it simpler, right? So we've become addicted to stress, and our response to it is key, right? So we have to integrate doing and non-doing, and I kind of make this as a joke, like make mindfulness simpler and easier to do and not do. So we want to do something by letting go expectations, knowing that the work is never done. We are constantly cycling through this mindfulness stuff and recognizing that everything we do is a choice, right? We just keep needing to practice and making it simpler and simpler and simpler, more focused and more present. We have better outcomes in that way. We become clear about the priorities and the way that we communicate them. And sometimes being simple is just taking 3 mindful breaths. So just for a moment, take a nice deep inhale and take a nice deep exhale. And Christy mentioned this before in her talk too. You can go to the next slide, please. So the applications of mindfulness in business are that we become more integrated in our personal and business, right? And by using these 7 practices, we can experience a bevy of positive outcomes, all that we mentioned in those adaptations in the beginning. But we also get to be aware of stressors and ride the waves of the storm instead of letting it sink us, right? Recognizing what we need to navigate, kind of moving through the iceberg infested waters and doing it skillfully. So you can go to the next slide. So at Above to Below, we've created some mindfulness techniques and exercises, and some of them are included in some of the stuff that we did today. And we try to help leaders, or we don't try, we do. We help leaders gain clarity, focus, and resilience through self-awareness. And that's awareness of self and other in environment, right? So we have conversations and ask really difficult questions. We get a full understanding and hear what you have to say about you and your company and your teams. And we also explore and interact with all of the pertinent team members and employees to get a picture of how things exist in their perspective. And then we create a guidance system and give you tools and worksheets and unique to you and your needs. We customize the entire process through a framework called the Triad Principle. So it's perceive, ponder, prosper. Think, feel, act. So perceiving is basic mindfulness. It's basic awareness. You tap into what you feel. You experience what's going on without a narrative or a storyline behind it. And again, this is over a series of time, right? You gain curiosity and allow that to lead your exploration. And you open yourself to any and all outcomes. Like I've owned businesses where I've been like so stuck in it and couldn't see a solution. But the moment I moved into mindful techniques, I could see that, oh, okay, I'm making things too complicated. Or, oh, here I am. I need to shut this down because this is actually not what I want to be doing, right? You find those alignments. So you cultivate more trust in yourself to clearly experience in an unfiltered way what's happening. And again, this goes for people and process. The ponder piece of this is taking what you discover in your exploration of perceiving and you process it. That means you think, analyze, contemplate the data as well as the feelings. It's like that point of convergence where it all comes together. And we, at Above to Below, craft a strategy to help you focus on immediate needs and priorities to kind of lighten the load a bit. The process is specifically created to be simple, achievable goals. And it's all rooted in the idea of being mindful and embracing humility. The last piece of this is prosper. So clearly we want to do all of these things to get you into better profits. So your time is your most valuable resource, and where you invest your time and energy matters. We use conversations, perceiving, pondering, and all of that to inform where your time needs to be invested. Maybe you need to pivot. Ding, ding, ding. And you know, energy flows where attention goes. So by moving away from fear and pain and recognizing those things and moving forward, you open up space to prosper. You create space to do new things, to shift. Each client we work with has unique needs, and we customize the process and allow for focus and organization through that work. We can transform your business to be a reflection of a cooperative, mindful leadership and the energy that you've invested. So you can go to the next slide. So that's kind of an overview of all of these things. And I just thought I'd throw this up here. Just for attending the talk, we decided to offer a $250 credit towards consultation for any of our services. Again, if you send me an email, I can kind of get you set up, and I can also send you that meditation so that you can kind of experience that too. Anybody have any questions, comments, concerns, snide remarks? I accept them all.
Well, you know, Jen. Oh, I'm sorry, Sandy. Go ahead.
I just sort of had a comment. As you were speaking about all of this, you took me back to a time many, many years ago in my life. I mean, the term mindfulness was not really well known, or I'm not even sure if it existed in the 70s.
Right.
But, you know, when you were dealing with all of those struggles through, you know, college and starting a career and a family.
Yep.
I actually became trained in self-hypnosis and biofeedback.
Oh, yeah.
And I used it all through college, my early career in life. And so many of the things you were talking about, the process I used, really opening up all your senses. I was, when I practiced regularly, I was to the point that I could control my heart rate and blood pressure. Mm-hmm. But I did, when I practiced, got to the point that when you would feel yourself entering into an environment that was stressful, mm-hmm. you could very simply sort of go back and, you know, just engage in breathing. Or I had a particular hand position I used to enter into a meditative state, I guess it was. And I could use all those little tricks to, you know, almost instantly calm myself down, alter my body's response, and calm my brain down, so to speak. And I, you know, when you were speaking, it's like, oh, wow, this is very reminiscent of what I practiced regularly, you know, well over 40 years ago.
Yeah.
So, but if I talk about biofeedback now, very few people seem to really understand what I'm talking about. But it seems like the result's the same.
Yes. So actually, I can say I know all about biofeedback because my undergraduate dissertation for my therapy portion of things, I actually used biofeedback as my research tool. And it is very much the same. It's training. It is a form, right? It is one tool of mindfulness. And that in that way, it's scientifically supported, right? You take your you can take your skin response. Actually, I have all of the equipment from my undergrad lab here in my house. I look at it all the time. I'm like, oh. But yeah, you can, you know, your heart rate, your breathing, your tension of your muscles, you can train yourself to do all of this. And again, you could see why it would be so, or you know, why it's so useful. Like, you know, going and interviewing, right? That is a stressful time, right? And in doing so, you know, you can use your biofeedback or mindfulness tools and, you know, do the same thing. But yeah, they are not the same thing, but they are part of the same ilk, right? So
I just wanted to share that. That's all.
Yeah, well, a really good observation, right?
Yeah, there's so much that continues, you know, that if you think about the practice of mindfulness, you know, the term might seem novel, but it's really something that has been practiced for centuries.
Yeah.
It's definitely not a new practice itself.
Right. Yeah. And it's sort of funny because like I was having a conversation with one of my very close friends who is an anthropologist and he's an academic in Buddhism. And so he knows all about all of these old practices, right? These meditation practices and things of that nature. And we both laughed because it's always like either 2,500 or 5,000 years old, right? There's never another number, but it's one of those numbers.
Well, we are running to the end of our session today. So as we think about, moving forward, the session will be recorded. So we'll invite everyone, to listen and to hopefully engage with some of the practices that you shared with us during our session today. Oh, you're getting a visitor. Fantastic.
Not a visitor.
Okay.
He feels the energy and he was just compelled to come and join us today. That's exciting. Good. Well, moving forward, we do have, for our Win Wednesdays, we do have one more session that we invite everyone to attend. So I'll turn it over to Sandy to wrap things up for us today. And for those who might have additional questions for Jen, she did share her email address. You're welcome to also reach out to Sandy and I, and we can connect you with Jen. And you can also do a search on Above to Below, where you can find out more information about the boutique consulting firm and about Jen and her background.
Thank you, Doreen. And thank you, Jen, so much for joining us today and sort of taking me back that memory lane trip that makes me regret having lost my practice. I may have to reconsider that. Great session. I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as I do. I don't see how anyone couldn't have. Our final session for this semester is going to be on December 16th at 1:30. And we have two individuals from the Pittsburgh Human Resource Association joining us, Liz Lamping and Catherine Miller. And they are going to speak to us on 8 ways to make the most of networking in a virtual world. It's something they have a large amount of experience in. So I'm excited about their session. And also it's really exciting for us to come to the end of our first semester with Win Wednesdays. We do have a couple important notices for you. We want you to hold the date for Friday, March 5th, 2021. We will be having the second AWIN, Accelerating Women in Industry. It will be virtual this spring, and the topic is going to be holistic resilience. And we will be having, it's a morning workshop from around 8 in the morning till noon. There's going to be virtual speakers, a keynote speaker, workshops, and a panelist discussion. So there's a lot of information that you will find valuable. As always, we are always interested in new ideas. If you have a topic you want to share, if you know someone that has a topic that you want them to share with us, please reach out to Doreen or I. My email is on the screen. You can also contact us through acceleratingwin.org. There's a contact option on the website. And as always, I want to thank everyone for making this initiative possible. The Rollins School of Business, Point Park University, all those people behind the scenes that make this technically a really successful event. And for people like Jennifer who have joined us today, we really appreciate everyone's support. And as we leave, I want to leave you with one little statement. Please remember that you're not alone. We are all together, and together we can make a difference. So I hope to see you again on December 16th. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies.